Welcome to the Midlife Midsters Podcast, your podcast for inspiration on being bold and saying yes to making the most of midlife.
So the inspiration for tonight's episode is something that happened during the pandemic. When we started out, what was supposed to be a week or two at home, and then it became months and months at home, a good friend of mine who's a therapist put something out on social media in our friend group saying, it was really important to pay attention to our emotional health during that difficult time. And so she had a set of 5 tips that we should try to do every day. And it was things like get outside, get some exercise, make contact with a friend, have a gratitude journal. So, and then, be thoughtful of your nutrition. And I thought that those were really helpful things, and they did help me get through the pandemic. And so as we've been talking a lot about midlife and how to successfully conquer the midlife era, one of the things we talked about is paying attention to your emotional wellness in a more sustained way. And that's why, Angie, we wanted to talk to you. Angie is a good friend of mine, Angie Zeidenberg, and emotional wellness is something you know a lot about. And so if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do, and then maybe we'll talk a little bit more about what you see as the components of emotional wellness.
Okay. Thank you for having me. So I started out as an educator, teacher, and then director of a nursery school in Bethesda. And then I transitioned to a health and wellness coach just because I went to Georgetown and did a program there. And I've always been interested in that aspect from like young kids all the way to adults. And so now what I get to do is work with young kids in a therapy practice in Bethesda, and teens in college, and young adults. And I also have my own practice that I work with midlife misters types, women. And I do mostly, I have some individual clients now. I started off just doing individual clients, but now I've kind of transitioned into more small groups and workshop settings. And I find it so helpful, and I just learned so much from others, and just seeing the connections between women and supporting each other. So I really have enjoyed that transition of working in that kind of setting. And I find it fascinating that young adults and midlife women we all kind of want the same thing. There's a lot of overlap with the emotional fitness piece and mind and body wellness, and figuring out what makes us tick and what makes us happy each day. And it's not an end result of getting happy. It's just a process and a practice. And that's what I kind of think of emotional fitness being, is just an ongoing practice, like you would work out your body. You're just working out finding things that make you feel strong when bad things happen, because you can't prevent those things.
Do people come in because they're aware that they're somehow lacking in their emotional fitness muscle, if you will? Or is it more of an overall, like maybe they have a health issue and they're trying to do a more holistic approach to it?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's mostly just people wanting to figure out like what makes me feel better? What can I do to make me feel better? They might not think of it as emotional fitness, but it's all kind of tied together with our, wellness in general. So I kind of think of it as like the different areas of wellness. So, different people have different ideas on this, but to me, it's like sleep and nutrition and physical activity and personal growth and social connections and what you do for work. And then your spirituality, what you do for your mindfulness practices.
So how do you guide people into looking at and developing their emotional wellness?
So I use this, I have several tools, but one of the favorite that seems to be like people really seem to gravitate towards it because it's very hands-on and visual, so they can see what it is that they want to work on. So it's a wheel that they color in, so they actually get to color and get markers or pencils and color in and kind of, and it doesn't mean that they have to get like, you rate yourself from 0 to 10, and then you kind of look at it and be like, well, I might be a 3 at that, but I don't really that doesn't make me happy. That doesn't what I care about. But it just kind of is helps people to see what they want to work on.
So the wheel consists of what?
The wheel consists of the different type of the 8 wellness areas that help with emotional fitness. So sleep is, one of the main things that everyone needs. So some people might think that they sleep really well, so that would be an area that they wouldn't want to focus on. Some people might think I sleep very poorly, so I want to focus on that area. So then we would make goals based on that one area and break it down into the really small steps. So
I think that emotional fitness, I like that term, by the way. I think it's so neglected because we don't stop to think about why something might not be working, or why we're not thinking bigger, or why we might have a low mood.
Right.
And talking about your wheel, I mean, for me, and I think a lot of people, if I felt like I had a low mood or was unmotivated for some reason, my first inclination would probably to speak to my primary care doctor and maybe even a therapist. Never been to one before, but I think I would seek that out. But what you're saying is you can actually look at a wheel or sit or come to somebody that specializes in emotional fitness like you and maybe give a stab at it yourself by looking at these areas of spirituality, sleep, and food. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. And I think a lot of people do think like there's something wrong with them, and they do feel like they have to see a therapist for just low moods. And sometimes, of course, that's necessary. But a lot of times it really is just the practice of self-awareness and self-kindness and our self-talk and just kind of figuring out like that. But it takes work, and you have to be, reflective in that.
Yeah. Well, in my age group, in the 50s, late 40s and people in their 50s as well, they're going through a lot of hormonal changes, especially women. And so low mood does come on. Mm-hmm. Do you find people in midlife, because you talked about that you like that, age. Actually, it's my favorite too because of the collaboration with women. Yeah. All that competitiveness is gone.
Exactly.
So, yeah, a lot of that wheel's filled for me through my friends as well.
Yeah.
But when they come to you, I mean, do they talk a little bit about do they get into the physical health and maybe where they are in life in midlife that you can, I'm sure you would refer them out for that, but do you assess those things as well when you're talking to somebody in midlife?
We do, especially that's more of the individual, less on the group setting, but sometimes it comes up with group, and it's really kind of helpful when other people, especially with hormones and menopause and different areas like that people really can relate to each other. And so that's really helpful. So it's definitely, I'm not the expert in any of this. I think that we learn from each other. So I think that that's like really helpful.
Well, I bring it up because my mother's generation would never have come and discussed any of that. Exactly. And I think it's so nice that it's in the forefront now. People are talking about it and women are talking about it. So I think it's great as you as a female talking to midlife women about it, because they might not actually want to bring it up, but it sounds like you do a pretty good assessment. So if something like that came up.
Right. Yeah. No, I think it's so healthy that people are talking about it. And, it is becoming a very popular topic. So
it is.
Great.
What do you do when you encounter someone who thinks they might have a problem with emotional fitness, but their issues are actually running much deeper than that? How are you able to assess that?
I think a couple of things. We first figure out like what the value system, what their values are, and what matters to them. And if it's something that, if they're setting goals and they're not able to keep those goals, and we kind of figure out like if it's aligned with their values, and usually if it is, then it's easier to keep those goals. If it's not, and it's something deeper, then we, then I will, either they already know that they need to see a professional, a doctor, or a therapist. But honestly, those people usually aren't coming to me for that. Like I haven't encountered that. I've like twice I have. And they were older people who, older than like in their mid 60s, almost 70s. And they did need to see a doctor.
Mm-hmm. Angie, you may want to keep this closer to you.
Okay.
You said a minute ago with group, it's really helpful because people can learn from each other. And I absolutely agree. I think when we talk about, especially when you're a menopausal or postmenopausal woman, when you talk with other women and realize like all of the things that you share in that experience, it's really helpful to building an awareness that you're not alone and you can actually address these things, don't need to be ashamed of them. But, and this is something you and I talked about, other aspects of the emotional wellness journey really are or have to be very individualized.
Right. Exactly.
How do you help people recognize like there's not a set formula? Because I think people want an answer, right? Like if you do this and you do that and you do this, you're going to be fine.
Right.
But it doesn't quite work that way.
No.
Exactly. And in fact, I mean, I think the main thing is to just let people know this, there's no end game to it. It's always changing. It's always going. It's always a practice. So just kind of make it fun and figure out like what matters and what, how you want to feel. And when you tap into your values, then you figure out the why, like why is this important to me? Because what's important to you may not be important to someone else or to me, So I think that's what's important, is just to make sure everyone understands that it's so individualized.
Angie, I know that we're in they call it an epidemic of loneliness coming out of COVID, I think through COVID as well. And you talked a little bit about your wheel, but if somebody came to you, it seems like it's mainly in older adults that feel isolated. What type of suggestions would you make to them to help them connect if they don't have that in their lives? A lot of them have older children and grandchildren that don't live where they are.
Yeah.
A lot of them have gone to working from home and not in the workplace anymore, which is isolating as well. Do you have tips for them of how they could get started being integrated somewhat into a social setting that might help them?
Yeah, well, I think the wheel is a great way to do that, because part of it is fun and creativity and personal growth and physical activity. And so these kinds of things you can think about, like what you like to do, and then sign up for classes or, and that's not for everyone. Some people they may not get their fulfillment from being around other people. So maybe it's a pet that they like to be around or, so I think that there's different ways for social connection. I do agree that it's important, but I think different people need different things.
And maybe if someone doesn't need as much social connection, they can build other parts or focus on other parts of the wheel.
Right.
To sort of satisfy their soul.
Right. Exactly.
Did you lay out everything in the wheel? We talked about it all. I know you mentioned some of them.
Yes.
Can you just
here?
Do you mind going through it?
Yeah. So I have like more of the health issues over on the right side. So sleep and rest, and that looks differently for different people as well. Nutrition, and that depends on how people want to focus on nutrition. Different people need different things for that too. The physical activity can be dance, or it can be going to the gym, or it can be going on a hike or taking a walk, going for a bike ride. So that, and a lot of times you can overlap these things. So like the physical activity can be with social connection, which I think a lot of people do that. So and then all kinds of spirituality, whether it's prayer or meditation, any kind of other gratitude, mindfulness practices like that. Nature is also in that category. And then personal growth can be anything that you want it to be in terms of learning new things and doing new things, adventure, or whatever. And fun and creativity is kind of similar in that. And then your occupation, which is volunteer or work, whatever you want to do.
Do you find when you have clients that come to you, is there one particular thing that the majority of people might have absent in their life as far as this, or is it pretty equal on whether some are not sleeping, some don't have social interaction? I'm just curious if one of these wheels is something that more people have less of than others.
I haven't noticed anything being less of. I think it depends on each person. Some people have a higher rate themselves higher, and they actually want to be a little less on that. So if they're seeing, too many friends, or then they might want to go a little less and say no a little bit more on the social. So it just depends. I mean, I've seen all sorts.
Overall, how do you think emotionally fit are people in general in this country?
That's a tough one. I think people are paying more attention to it, so I think that's really good. And I think people sometimes underestimate how much they are doing for themselves. So,
That's good to hear, actually.
Yeah.
So the first thing you would do then, just to have a sense of the process, a client would go through the wheel and would sort of indicate how much they want to focus in each of these areas.
Yes.
And then once you see that, you give them ideas for how to focus in those areas.
Right. And it's really important to just not overdo it. So I'm really like one little teeny tiny thing. So you want to build the skill of success. So, and that whole efficacy is really true. I think like if you build something, if you start small and they succeed, then they know that they can do it and they want to do more. So it's really just really small things. So, I think if they want to have physical activity and they don't do anything at the time, then maybe putting their shoes by the door and their workout clothes on, and then maybe they don't go out that first day, and then they do that again the second day, and maybe they go around the block. So it really is just like setting up for success.
I like the fact that some of these, like talking about the exercise and the fitness, yes, it's for emotional fitness, but also they're getting closer to their own physical fitness and health itself. The same with nutrition and the same with sleep, just the neurological aspects of good sleep. So if somebody does look at this, I mean, they're knocking out a few things, not just the emotional fitness, which is nice.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what I like, it's so intertwined. It's so connected with the mind, body wellness, with the emotional fitness. Like it's almost not its own.
It's wonderful people are talking about emotional fitness.
Yeah.
That just was not a thing in my 20s and 30s. People did not talk so much about that. And now the self-care, and I think women are talking about it more than men.
Yeah.
I worry about the men sometimes.
Me too.
For sure. But I think it's wonderful that you've opened this practice up, and not only for kids, but also doing it for midlife women. I think a lot of people can benefit from learning from you and just taking those steps, knowing that it is doable.
Right.
I know that there are bigger things on the landscape for some people, that simple things might not address that, but it's the first step.
Right. And this can build on itself, some people might want grander things for themselves. And that definitely, this is just one tool. So it's not like the only tool that is used. So I think, the main one that we start off even before this is the values exercise and the identification of what that is. And they have choices in this exercise of like hundreds of values. And I don't let them pick family just because most of us have family as the number one thing that matters to us. So that's the obvious, but just kind of thinking of like what else matters, and that always changes as well. So
I'm curious, because if I was in a position where I felt like I needed something like that, like I said, I'd go to primary care. I'd probably go to a therapist. If I needed medication, I'm a nurse. I believe in meds for certain things. That's the route I would go. I would not even know that your profession exists. So how do people find you? Is there a lot written about emotional fitness? Because it's not really therapy. I mean, you're doing an assessment of somebody's almost in a holistic way, is the way I look at this, and allowing somebody to get where they need to go before actually taking these other avenues. But like I said, I felt like, I'm kind of in the know about medical professionals somewhat, medical professions somewhat, but yet I would not have known that. So how do people find you? How do people find people like you in other parts of the country? And how can they get in touch with like the wheel and knowing a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think I do think that coaching is becoming, or health and wellness coaching is becoming a little more known, and doctors are too, because, honestly, doctors haven't been trained in a lot of the emotional fitness part. And I think that a lot of them are starting to be aware of that, and new training is happening for doctors in that area, especially with women's health in general, but also just with mind and body wellness. So I do think that that is an area that will become even more known. I think that people, whether Maria Shriver type people and, who really care about these things, they're making a lot of noise about this. So I think that, it is important that people will start paying attention. As far as I do have some doctors who have referred their patients to me that need health and wellness coaching, that's not the right word, but who would benefit. So that is a way that people find me, word of mouth, and parents that were in the school where I worked. And so really that's how people have found me.
One of the things
my doctor's office actually has, for example, with the nutritionist, there's actually the nutritionist and there's a nutrition coach. Mm-hmm. And then they also have like massage therapy and Reiki. And the thing that's been interesting is over the last, I'd say 5 years, maybe, there's more of it's really a Western construct that your body is separated from your mind. And that's not true in a lot of Eastern philosophies and Eastern religions. And I think there's a lot of things that are getting better in the United States because we're starting to break down that difference between the mind and the body and the spirit.
Right.
And you see it in different modalities. Some of them are not, they're not healthcare related, like Reiki or massage or coaching or that. Mm-hmm. Some of them are. I mean, I know in some trauma therapies, they've started to integrate talk therapy with some other like physical modalities to make people, to really help people get well. And I think it's sort of interesting. I think it's a great direction because it's also demedicalizes some of these things and moves it in a different direction.
Right. And also the same with therapy. I think a lot of people think they need therapy and, they might not.
That's the thing I think is very interesting about this process, because what you're essentially doing is giving people tools to sort of help heal themselves, or at least see how far they can go.
Right.
It's obviously not going to be a solution for everyone who's got emotional issues or emotional needs.
Right.
But taking charge of that yourself and seeing how far you go in and of itself helps solve some of the problem.
Exactly. And I like the way you said that, because I do think that it's so important for the person to discover what they want and not for someone to tell them, because, there is a study that if doctors tell their patients something to do, like you have to eat healthy and you have to eat these foods or you will die in 5 years. It was like 95% of the people do not do it, even if
we all have kids.
Yeah, exactly. Or you walk out and you forget, right? So you just are like, what did they just say? And doctors aren't going to follow up. So I think it is just accountability and coming from within. So when you come up with the idea what you want, you're more likely to do it. Again, it taps into your values. What matters to me? So. And I think that that's what's so important, is that it's not very helpful. And it's been proven that like, if I were to tell someone like, well, I think you should just sleep better. And I think if you go to bed at 9 and, do this and that, then they're not going to do it because they didn't come up with it. So.
I also find that super frustrating because a lot of times when somebody tells you that, I'm like, yeah, that's great. How about how?
Exactly.
It's not really the what, because everybody knows to go to bed at 10 and everybody knows to eat healthy. Exactly. It's not that. It's like the how. How do I organize my day? How do I get this done? How do I find the motivation? And I find that to be completely 100%. Not helpful.
It's because we all know what we should be doing. And that's not helpful when someone tells us what we already know.
Mm-hmm. My physician, who is now retired, so hopefully he won't hear this, but he was my physician for a long time and I really liked him. But like at the end, I was really getting frustrated because like his solution to everything was like, well, you just need to do X. And one of the things we argued about a lot is like, I've had a hard time keeping my weight at a normal level. And he was like, well, you need to do an hour of intense aerobics every day. And I was like, what planet do you live on? What planet do you think I live on that I can put an hour a day into intense aerobic activity? I've got kids, I've got a house, I've got a job. Like, that's not happening. But I like what you said earlier about like that doesn't mean you can't do little steps like going out for a walk every morning. So now I'm going to actually add this to my morning routine. I'm going to take over the morning dog walk just so that it's useful. I get to spend time with my dog. I get to be outside, and I will get a little bit of exercise. Doesn't need to be an hour of intense aerobics.
Exactly.
Angie, on the wheel, some of them are so self-explanatory, like you need to get your 8 hours or whatever your sleep requirements are. You need to eat healthy. You need to exercise. Can you talk a little bit about spirituality? I have a personal, like for me, I feel like that's one area that I could strengthen more. When you see somebody that is lacking in that space, what I don't want, I'm a nurse, so I'm going to say signs and symptoms, but what do you find within their day or in their life that is missing for them because they don't have that peace? Are they not at peace with themselves? Is it emotional regulation? I mean, I'm just curious, if somebody's missing spirituality, what do you see, and what are kind of the things that they're coming to you as challenges for themselves?
I mean, honestly, I don't know that I would notice unless it's important to them. I think sometimes I might notice if say they're not sleeping and being out in nature or meditating or doing some of these other things, mindfulness practices might help. Then that might be like something that we would explore together if they wanted that. But and I think if they're feeling overwhelmed with stress, then mindfulness definitely comes in. Depending if they, have prayer in their life, then that's something that, I think people would gravitate towards. If not, then there are other ways to express their spirituality. Okay. So,
yeah, I was just curious about that because spirituality to me brings, there's a hope piece to it.
Yeah.
With the faith piece, there's also a balance to it and a peacefulness about it. So I was just curious because that's one of the things that I think people do lack. Is a sense of spirituality.
Yeah. And I think if they're doing the wheel and they think about that and they reflect on that, and that's something that they would want to do, then we would pick something that could match up with what.
Well, and I like the fact you talked about nature. I mean, it was the first thing out of your mouth. When I was talking about spirituality, it would have been the last for me. So I think that's really interesting when you're saying it is very individual. Right. For me, it would be more meditation, being in church, whatever. But when you said that, I like that. So listeners know that there's such a broad area that sits in that space of spirituality.
I mean, and I think we talked about it before, just with the senses, that could be part of it.
Oh,
too.
yeah.
Just like really paying attention to that inside of you.
Oh, so I want to pause on that for a minute because actually I think that's really intriguing.
Are you going to talk about food?
No.
Those smells are so good. And she's such a good
smell and the sense of taste. The force is strong on this one. But I hadn't really thought about that as a piece of spirituality, but awakening and being more aware of your senses.
Right.
So what sort of things would you recommend somebody do to sort of work on their sensual sensory development?
Well, I think taking mindful walks is a really good way of doing that, because then you're able to see things and smell things and hear things and feel things, maybe not taste, but you might not be able to cover all 5 at the same time, but that's a great way to do it, because then you're outside and you're also you're not just sitting and meditating or whatever. So that works for some people. It does not work for everyone, obviously. So I think that could be something. I think when you wake up, if it was something important to you, you could pay attention right then when you wake up, and that would cover your bases of noticing, one thing that you see and smell and go through the senses like that. Sometimes people, when they're brushing their teeth, they'll taste the toothpaste, and that will be like a mindfulness practice for them. And they are tasting and they're looking at themselves in the mirror, and they're, smelling the toothpaste. And so that could be a sense.
Boy, it can be so different for so many people. Right. For me, if it's raining, I want to get out and feel the rain.
Yeah.
I'm crazy about it. And I like my toes in sand and mud and grass.
I have one for y'all last weekend. You can't do this all the time. You can only do it once a year for a few weeks, and only if you live basically in the southeastern or the northeastern United States. Last weekend, we were visiting a girlfriend of mine in North Carolina in the mountains, and we did this lightning bug tour.
Oh, it's helpful.
It was the coolest thing. We were in this like 8,000 acre preserve, and they have in the mountains of North Carolina, and I think a little bit Tennessee, these things called blue ghost lightning bugs. And they're tiny. They're they're little blue lightning bugs, and they rise from the ground. You walk around.
It's magical.
It does sound magical.
So we did that, and it's at night. So you get there at 9:00 at night, and you have to, as the sun goes down, you have to let your eyes adjust, and then because if you don't, you can't see them.
Yeah.
It's too difficult to see. And then at the end, there's they have red flashlights so you can get out because it's pitch black. Like you can see your hand in front of your face, but you can't see your feet. And then at the end, we got to this field, and there were thousands of lightning bugs, that's everywhere. And we just stood there, and I was like, and I've loved them since I was a little kid. When my kids were little, I'd let them stay up late.
Remember catching them?
Oh my gosh, yes. Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, so that was
super
cool. You know, the other crazy thing was because you couldn't see very well, you could smell everything, including other people, which was, they didn't
the
smell
other
bad.
sense jumped
but
in.
you could,
Compensated.
You could smell other people. You could smell the woods.
That's what I love.
Really
too,
cool.
You just said your senses kick in.
Yeah.
That's really
something we've talked about a couple of times in some of our podcasts, and even an earlier podcast that we recorded on the same day as this day. Sometimes that sense of childlike activity, childlike wonder, and going back and doing the things that you might have done when you were a kid that can still be fun when you're an adult. And
lightning bugs are fun.
Yeah.
And it is a sense of wonder that we tend to lose, but we shouldn't.
And we shouldn't.
Right?
And maybe that's why kids generally are happier than we get to be as adults. We're all stressed out. But tapping into the things that just feel good, I think that's really great. I got to go.
Oh my gosh.
I love that. Yeah.
Well, I'm sure, we all have them in our backyards where we live, so you can come over to us, Leanne.
Eastern Shore, there's lots of them in the summer.
But along those lines, I have heard that going back to your 7-year-old self is a really good place to start for happiness, because that whatever you love to do and felt and the things that matter to you at your 7-year-old self can also be relevant in your 60-year-old self.
I believe that. It's
playing Barbies and jumping rope.
Yeah,
people pick up hobbies that they loved doing when they were young, and you think about the adult adult sports groups, and nobody can see this wonderful lady over here who's actually recording this podcast, but she does a lot of adult sports, and you find more people in their 30s, 40s, and 50s that are going back and playing even kickball, dodgeball.
Yeah.
Pickleball. And I think that is great. And then you see a lot of people going to watercoloring and even color books. All the adult color books that are around. It's amazing.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
So any last words of wisdom for someone who might think, hey, I maybe needed an emotional wellness tune-up?
Yeah. I think really just allowing that self-awareness and that self-kindness and our self-talk, and be aware of that, and notice when it's starting to get off track, and catching those negative thoughts. And you don't have to go the opposite way and say oh, I'm so great, but just noticing I just said this really, I just said something negative to myself, and just kind of switching gears and being okay, so I, ate the extra cookie. It's okay. I'm still a good person, and I can start over tomorrow. So I think just really noticing, being aware, not ignoring it, but just accepting, and just practicing the kindness and figuring out what makes us happy. So I think, it's all tied into happiness habits. It's just an ongoing process. So, finding what makes us happy, and just keep working at it, because it's a verb. It's something that you just keep doing.
Oh, I like that. Happiness is a verb.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Angie. This has been really helpful and informative. And I think maybe we'll all get ourselves copies of the wheel and start working on our.
I already identified an area.
And we'll probably post a copy of this on our website. So anybody who's been listening to this and interested in this podcast can see the wheel and maybe think about it, and we'll put your contact information up
Where
there
can
too.
they find you, Angie?
They can find me at bestinself.com.
Okay,
So
best, B-E-S-T. Okay, in self.
Self, yes.
Okay, .com.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.